I want to take a little opportunity to remind you in these difficult days of COVID restrictions and lockdown that many of you are experiencing today. I want to remind you of a little story from a minor prophet by the name of Joel. It was a time that was really unprecedented. They had never experienced anything like it before. In fact, Joel begins with saying, "Hear this, you elders, and listen, all who live in the land. Has anything ever happened like this before? Nothing like this as we've ever experienced. This is unique and almost indescribable. Tell it to your children, and let your children tell it to their children, and then their children tell it to the next generation. We've never experienced anything like this before." We can relate to that, I think, with this whole COVID-19 experience. Now, we are in lockdown in Australia at the moment, and I know this is really difficult for many people. But we have some 48 cases or something, I think, new cases in the last 24 hours. And yet, there are countries around the world who have tens of thousands of cases a day. We have had no one die of COVID-19 in Australia in the last year, I believe. Whereas there are countries like Indonesia who have over 1,000 die a day at the moment. These are sad times for our entire world. Almost unprecedented times. At least nothing we've experienced in the last 100 years or so. Now, Joel's talking about a different experience. He is talking about a time when locusts actually come and devoured all of the property, all of the plants, all of their livelihood. They didn't know how they were going to survive. The businesses were shut down. Their food supply was gone. It was a time in which they couldn't understand what was happening. They couldn't fathom how they were going to go on, how they were going to keep on just living and surviving this time. And Joel gives them a challenge. He says, look, we should all repent. We should all mourn what is happening. Now, a common way of mourning in Joel's day was for people to rip their outer garments and cover themselves with ash to show publicly that they were in mourning. But Joel gives them this challenge in these very familiar verses to many of you. In Joel chapter 2, verse 12, it says, "Even now, after all of this calamity, after all of this hardship, even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning. Rend your heart, not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate. God is slow to anger and abounding in love, and he relents from sending calamity. Who knows? He may yet turn and relent and leave behind a blessing." Isn't that beautiful? God says to them, look, return to me. Tear your heart, open your heart to me, not your clothing. Surrender yourselves to me. For God is a compassionate God. He's gracious and compassionate. He is slow to anger and abounding in love. I want to challenge you. I don't hear me saying that all of this calamity has come on our world at the moment because we are so far from God. I know that there are many faithful people. A remnant of the church exists all around the world, in many countries all around the world. There are faithful people crying out to God, trying to faithfully serve God and serve their community, trying to share the hope that we have in Jesus. I understand that. But I do want to challenge you in this time when we're going, what do I do? How do I live? How am I going to make things right? How am I going to survive? God, we've never experienced something like this before. God, why is all of this happening? Maybe, just maybe, you and I should take this as an opportunity to pour our hearts out to God. To mourn not publicly, not just on social media, sharing our outrage of all that's happening, but just before God, cry out to him and say, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. God, I want to give my life to you. I want to recommit my life to you. I trust you, even in the uncertainty, even though we're restricted in many ways, though each day we don't know what's coming. We don't know what to expect. God, I trust in you. Oh, I guarantee you will find God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in love. During this time, when we've got nowhere to go, we need to stay at home, we need to keep one another safe, I want to challenge you. Spend some time with God, just your heart to his, and surrender your heart to him. You will find compassion, you will find grace, you will find him abounding in love. God bless.